They said it was fiction, but it played like a memory someone tried to suppress. Released in 1987, Extreme Prejudice wasn't your average shoot 'em up. It was brutal, yes, but there was something else beneath the surface, something precise, unemotional, the kind of cold you only find in official documents. Under Walter Hill's direction, and with Nick Nolte's steely presence leading the charge, the film told the story of a Texas Ranger waging war on drug smugglers, ghosts from his past, and shadows cast by American intelligence. But what made it to theaters was already a filtered version. Behind the raw dialogue and stylized violence were rumors that the production had dipped too close to real-world tactics. Actual former operatives were cast not for star power but for authenticity. Technical scenes were storyboarded with disturbing accuracy. Dialogues were trimmed. Scenes disappeared. Some say the edits weren't for pacing, they were for permission. The ratings board pushed back hard, not because the film was explicit, but because it resembled something they'd seen before, not in cinema, in archives. The final cut still carries weight, but there's a hollowed-out feeling to it, like the movie we got was the safe version of a story someone never really wanted told. These are 20 weird facts you didn't know about Extreme Prejudice, and some of them were nearly erased completely. Fact has shown. Former soldiers slipped into the cast without credit. They didn't need to rehearse how to carry a weapon. They already knew. Among the group of operatives featured in Extreme Prejudice, a handful weren't trained in drama schools, they were trained in classified operations. Real former Special Forces members were brought onto the set to fill in as background soldiers, advisors, and, in some cases, key tactical performers. Their presence added a level of realism that couldn't be faked nor fully explained. Walter Hill didn't just want actors who looked tough, he wanted men who'd been trained to move, aim, and operate like professionals. The result was unsettling. Extras moved in formation without being directed. Gunplay sequences were executed with a kind of rhythm that felt less choreographed and more practiced. But here's the thing. Several of these men were never officially listed in production credits. At least one used a false name on set. And when filming wrapped, they were gone. No press appearances, no follow-ups, no explanation. One crew member recalled asking where one of the soldiers had come from. The answer? Don't ask. In a film about ghost units and invisible wars, it's chilling to realize some of the men on screen weren't pretending. Fact #2. The MPAA didn't object to gore, they feared realism. It wasn't the body count that raised eyebrows. It was the authenticity. When Extreme Prejudice was first submitted to the MPAA, the board didn't object to its violent content in the traditional sense. There was blood, yes, but not more than most rated films of the era. What disturbed them was how plausible the violence felt. Gunshots didn't explode in slow motion, they snapped, people dropped, and the motivations behind the killings were murky, bureaucratic, and cold. The ratings board expressed discomfort with the film's tone, clinical, procedural, and detached. They questioned whether certain phrases in the dialogue came from actual military doctrine. One reviewer called it weaponized authenticity. To avoid a restrictive rating, Hill trimmed a few scenes, dulled some of the language, and removed a short exchange that allegedly referenced a real CIA initiative. The final cut passed with an R barely. The real question was never how much blood was spilled. It was, who was this film speaking for? Fact #3. It began as a modern echo of a Western classic. Before it became its own beast, Extreme Prejudice was a cinematic echo of an older, bloodier frontier. The earliest concept for the film was conceived as a modern-day thematic successor to The Wild Bunch, Sam Peckinpah's brutal farewell to the myth of the honorable outlaw. The parallels weren't subtle. Both films explored men out of time, bound by lost codes, drawn into violence, not out of thrill but resignation. Early drafts leaned heavily into that Western fatalism. John Milius was reportedly involved at one point, aiming to update the idea for a Reagan-era backdrop. He envisioned aging warriors, not ready for peace, but too broken for ideology. Though Milius left before production, Hill retained the structure. Betrayals unfold like old gunfights. Loyalties dissolve without fanfare. One death scene near the end reportedly mimics a Peckinpah composition frame for frame but stripped of nostalgia. And the title? Pulled straight from a Vietnam-era phrase used in field orders. No symbolism, just execution. This wasn't just a spiritual sequel to The Wild Bunch. It was its ghost, rewired for the modern war machine. Fact #4. A real D officer tried to play the villain. Powers Booth wasn't always the first pick. In fact, for a brief moment, he was nearly replaced by someone who had never acted before. During early development, a former DEA field agent approached the producers with an unusual offer. He wanted to play Cash Bailey, the film's cartel-connected antagonist. His pitch was bold. He had lived the war on drugs, had stared down real traffickers, and knew the language, the look, the weight of the role. Some execs were intrigued. A real-life operative on screen could generate buzz and credibility. But Walter Hill wasn't convinced. He believed performance came not from biography, but from nuance. And Booth had that in spades. The agent was thanked and dismissed. Booth stayed and transformed Bailey into something far more chilling than a caricature. With his smooth cadence and deadpan menace, he gave the character moral opacity. You couldn't hate him, you just couldn't trust him. In hindsight, Hill made the right call. Because sometimes, what you need isn't real experience, it's real control. Fact #5. One key action scene was cut after a silent warning. The film was supposed to feature a second major ambush, a violent, precisely executed sequence involving the rogue operatives storming a storage facility. The scene was rehearsed, shot, and partially edited. Then it disappeared. What happened? According to accounts from insiders, an early cut of the ambush leaked to someone with ties to the defense industry. Not long after, TriStar received a quiet but firm notice. The tactics shown too closely mirrored actual classified operations. Phrases like improper procedural replication were used. The studio reacted fast. The scene was pulled. Editors were ordered to destroy the footage. Hill, reportedly livid, wasn't allowed to contest it. The sequence didn't just go missing, it was buried. And just like that, a centerpiece of the film was gone. All that remains is a subtle gap in the narrative momentum, one that still feels like something was supposed to explode, but didn't. It wasn't censorship. It was redaction. Fact #6. Mexican officials publicly objected to the film's implications. For a movie that never claimed to be political, Extreme Prejudice provoked international tensions. At a private industry screening in Los Angeles, a representative from the Mexican consulate reportedly stood up mid-film and left visibly angry. The issue? The film's portrayal of Mexico as a battlefield for rogue U.S. military actions, conducted without consent or oversight. In the days that followed, an official complaint was filed. Several Mexican theaters pulled the movie from their schedules. Press outlets in Mexico criticized it as propaganda masked as genre. TriStar responded with a brief disclaimer about the film's fictional nature, but damage control had already failed. The release was delayed in several Latin American markets. Some VHS editions distributed abroad carried a unique label disavowing any resemblance to real events. But fiction, once too close to the truth, becomes radioactive. Sometimes it's not what a film says that causes backlash. It's what it implies without saying a word. Fact #7. Walter Hill filmed only what he intended to use. Directors typically overshoot to stay safe in the editing room. Walter Hill did the opposite. On Extreme Prejudice, Hill was notorious for limiting coverage. No extra angles, no insert shots for safety. Every scene was shot with the specific intent to be used exactly as framed. It wasn't efficiency, it was a philosophy. He didn't want his vision second-guessed in the editing bay. He wanted editors to feel the restrictions, just like his characters. This approach added a strange tension to post-production. There was no room to shift tone, no extra footage to soften a sequence. If a scene felt brutal, it stayed that way. The climactic shootout is a perfect example. Almost entirely composed of locked-in shots, it forces the audience to witness, not interpret. You aren't led to emotion, you sit in it. Hill didn't just craft scenes, he committed to them. And once he pulled the trigger on a shot, he never looked back. Fact #8. Nick Nolte, trained under a real Texas Ranger who had killed. Jack Bentine wasn't built from imagination, he was built from fieldwork. To prepare for the role, Nick Nolte embedded himself with a real Texas Ranger, a veteran of the force with confirmed kills and decades on the southern border. This man didn't teach Nolte how to act. He didn't give advice, he simply let him observe. Nolte watched him move, watched him remain silent when others would speak, noted how his hand rested near his hip without thinking. The Ranger wasn't performative, he was mechanical, conditioned by repetition and survival. Nolte absorbed everything. Many of the character's subtleties, his posture, his delayed reactions, the way he squints before responding came directly from that experience. The Ranger visited the set once. He nodded at Nolte during a scene, then left without saying a word. Sometimes, the quietest men leave the loudest impact. Fact #9. The zombie unit was based on more than just rumor. A covert team made up of men officially listed as killed in action might sound like cinematic fantasy, but traces of it exist, just not in plain sight. During research, screenwriter Harry Kleiner discovered references in declassified Vietnam War-era documents to a program that allegedly utilized soldiers declared dead for operations that couldn't be publicly traced. It went by several names, all redacted but one stuck: Project Rebirth. These weren't just spies, they were ghosts, men erased from records, denied identity, and sent back into the field with no backup and no recognition. Extreme Prejudice dramatizes the concept with disturbing familiarity. The unit's structure, behavior, and cold detachment match rumored protocol. When former intelligence personnel were asked about it, most declined to comment. One simply said, "It's not wrong." What if the movie wasn't imagining the unit but sanitizing it? Fact Hasson 0. A deleted ending was screened once then vanished. In the editing room, there was an ending, far more explosive than what audiences saw, but it didn't survive the cut. Walter Hill reportedly shot an alternate final scene in which Nolte's character meets with a senior government official, one responsible for assembling the covert unit. Instead of a confrontation, it ends in a quiet, execution-style killing. No soundtrack, no dialogue, just a decision carried out like a classified directive. The scene was shown to a small group of executives. Reaction: silence. Then came the order: cut it, destroy it. The studio cited pacing, but crew members believed it had more to do with content than structure. The footage has never surfaced, but one editor claimed the props department left a strange detail in that scene: a file folder labeled OP 722 divided by PHX 1969. A random string? Or a breadcrumb meant to be buried? Fact Hassanon. Composer Jerry Goldsmith quit over a philosophical divide. Jerry Goldsmith was initially attached to compose the score for Extreme Prejudice. But before he ever wrote a note, the collaboration fell apart. Goldsmith wanted to bring layers, emotional tension, thematic cues, a swelling undercurrent of moral decay. Hill didn't want music that explained. He wanted silence that judged. The two clashed, not over notes, but over meaning. Goldsmith reportedly said the film felt hollow. Hill countered that the hollowness was the point. The partnership ended. In stepped Ry Cooder, who built a minimal, percussive score that amplified the film's stripped-down aesthetic. No overt melodies, just dread with rhythm. Goldsmith never acknowledged the project again. Hill never explained the break. In the end, the film's soundtrack wasn't composed, it was restrained. Fact Hassan 2. The title is a direct quote from covert terminology. There's nothing symbolic about the name Extreme Prejudice. It's lifted directly from Cold War jargon. Terminate with Extreme Prejudice. First surfaced in internal U.S. intelligence communications during the Vietnam War. It was a euphemism, cold, clinical, for assassination orders that couldn't be traced back to official command. Walter Hill didn't invent the phrase, he resurrected it. Naming the film after a real-world directive gave it an edge few titles carry. It wasn't metaphor, it was admission. And once you realize that, the tone of the entire movie shifts. Characters aren't just executing missions, they're enacting decisions written in the language of plausible deniability. The title isn't stylized, it's operational. Fact Hasson 3. Tom Atkins turned it down, and Michael Ironside took it to a darker place. Before Michael Ironside was cast as Major Hackett, the role was offered to someone with a very different energy: Tom Atkins, a veteran of gritty thrillers and cult horror. Atkins reportedly liked the idea, but not the character. Hackett wasn't conflicted, he was empty. His actions weren't driven by revenge or survival, but by mechanical obedience. There's nothing behind his eyes, Atkins allegedly said, before declining the part. Enter Ironside. Where Atkins might have added weariness, Ironside brought ice. He leaned into the character's detachment, making Hackett feel less like a man and more like a system. Hill gave him space to improvise. Some say that's where Hackett's most haunting lines were born. The final result wasn't just a cold performance, it was surgical. Hackett didn't need redemption, he needed clearance. Fact Hassan 4. The entire town was built like a battlefield. They didn't find a location, they manufactured one. From the dirt up, instead of scouting a real border town, Hill had his team construct a full-scale replica outside El Paso. But this wasn't just set dressing. It was a calculated environment, designed like a live-fire training ground. Every building, alley, and rooftop was positioned for function: line of sight, cover, ambush potential. Hill brought in military consultants to help map it out. The town was less a set and more a simulation. When firefights broke out on camera, actors moved through real tactical spaces, not theatrical backdrops. After filming wrapped, the set was left behind. Law enforcement agencies used it for drills. Urban explorers found remnants years later. In a film about operations that never officially happened, it makes sense they filmed it in a town that doesn't exist on any map. Fact Hasson 5. A real shootout happened nearby and the crew kept rolling. While prepping a night scene, the crew heard sharp pops echo across the desert. They weren't sound tests. They weren't part of the shoot. A real gunfight had broken out just beyond the production perimeter. Local police later confirmed it involved rival smuggling groups clashing over a disputed crossing route. Multiple arrests followed, but what did the crew do? They didn't shut down. They didn't panic. According to eyewitnesses, Walter Hill told them to keep the cameras rolling, not on the violence itself, but on the environment, the tension, the unpredictability. Some of that footage never made it into the final cut, but the feeling of it, the pacing, the tone, it shaped the editing of the film's climactic battle. Art imitating life is common, but this time, life bled through the edges of the frame, and no one called cut. Fact #X. The US military reviewed the script quietly. Some scripts raise red flags. Extreme Prejudice raised 2. Before filming began, the Department of Defense reached out not once, but twice requesting to review the screenplay. The first request was ignored. The second, quietly accepted. Sources close to the production revealed that a revised version of the script was passed along under the table. The concern wasn't public relations, it was content. The structure of the Black Ops unit, the language of deniable missions, the procedural realism of certain sequences all hit too close to operational reality. While the military didn't demand formal rewrites, edits soon followed. Lines were softened, names changed, and one particular scene involving an unauthorized chain of command was removed altogether. There was no official stamp, no public comment. But when parts of a story vanish after a courtesy review, it's clear the fiction got uncomfortably close to someone's truth. Fact #7. The original opening was so disturbing it was pulled immediately. The film almost began with a whisper that turned into a scream. An early cut of Extreme Prejudice opened with the execution of a federal agent tied to a chair, eyes hollow, defiance draining, no music, just breath and dust. Flashbacks intercut between the gun barrel and moments of his former life graduation, family, the academy. The audience reaction during the first screening was visceral. Some viewers assumed they were watching real footage. Others walked out in silence. One man reportedly stood up and asked, "Is this a documentary?" TriStar reacted fast. The scene was pulled the next morning, replaced with a more conventional opening. The final version introduced the plot without dragging the audience into immediate psychological freefall. But those who saw it said the original version made the film feel like evidence, not entertainment. Fact #8. A CIA insider admitted the film was uncomfortably close. Years after Extreme Prejudice hit theaters, a quote appeared in a now-defunct intelligence newsletter. The source was a former CIA field operative identified only as G. When asked about Hollywood depictions of covert operations, his reply was short but cutting. That Hill film, Extreme Prejudice, didn't just hit close, it scraped the paint. The article offered no further detail, no specifics on what the film got right, no breakdown of protocols or parallels. But the tone lingered. Those few words ignited a fire in conspiracy forums and military fan circles. Suddenly, fans were dissecting the film frame by frame, comparing Hill's fictional unit to known operations that never made it into headlines. Hill was asked about the quote years later. He reportedly replied, "Funny what people see when you don't blink. When reality doesn't deny fiction, it validates it." Fact #Hassan. One actor vanished and no one ever found him. Among the ensemble portraying the covert zombie unit, one man showed up, then disappeared. Credited in early internal notes as R. Sloan, the performer appeared in several tactical scenes, always in formation, always silent. He delivered no lines, made no behind-the-scenes noise, and yet, his presence was noted by how unremarkable he tried to be. After production wrapped, he ghosted. No agent returned calls, no SAG record matched the name. When the studio attempted to send post-production paperwork, the address bounced back. One assistant remembered being told, "Don't follow up." He was a walk-on. But this wasn't a local extra. He'd been on set for weeks, always early, always precise. A crew member later speculated he wasn't there to act, he was there to observe. In a film about dead men operating in silence, maybe one of them was more than metaphor. Fact #20. It was quietly blacklisted from US military theaters. No memo was circulated, no press release issued, but soon after its release, Extreme Prejudice began disappearing from places under military jurisdiction. Screenings on overseas bases were canceled. PX video shelves didn't stock it. In casual conversations, service members said the title was not approved for morale screenings. Why? No one offered an official reason. But the speculation was clear. The film's depiction of deniable units, unofficial kill orders, and blurred military oversight hit too close to reality. In an era when institutional image mattered more than ever, the film's cold, matter-of-fact tone about what men in uniform were trained to do became a problem. TriStar never confirmed the suppression, but they didn't deny it either. Some truths aren't buried, they're just removed from the screening schedule. Bonus fact: a hidden code appears in the final scene and it doesn't belong there. Blink and you'll miss it. Pause, and you might start asking questions. As Extreme Prejudice closes, just before the screen fades to black, a folder lands in a file box. It's only on screen for a second. But in the corner of the folder is a hand-scrawled code, OP 722 divided by PHX 1969. It wasn't in the shooting script, it's never referenced in dialogue, no actor interacts with it, but there it is plain as day. PHX 1969 has been connected by researchers to Operation Phoenix, the CIA's controversial program of targeted assassinations during the Vietnam War. The prefix OP 722 shows up in at least one declassified document, heavily redacted and still unexplained. When asked years later about the code, Walter Hill responded cryptically, "If it's there, someone thought it needed to be." The production designer offered nothing. It's unclear whether the code was a planted signature, an inside reference, or something slipped in without permission. But its presence changes the tone of that final shot. It reframes the story not as a conclusion but as a cover story with loose threads still showing. Sometimes, fiction doesn't just hint at reality, it leaves the file number. Some films end with closure. Extreme Prejudice ends with questions quiet, unanswered, and perhaps unanswerable. Was it just an action movie? Or was it a blueprint dressed as fiction? With real operatives on screen, redacted scenes, and codes that point beyond the frame, the line between cinema and classified begins to blur. Now it's your turn. Which fact shifted your view of the film? And do you believe that final scene was hiding something accidentally left in, or intentionally placed? Tell us what you think in the comment. We'll be reading very closely.